Good morning, this is Roberto speaking from Kyoto Club. Welcome to all the attendees. Today we have another webinar on development of Kyoto Protocol to the Paris Agreement and opportunities and challenges of climate actions.
Good morning. Perfect. I'm Karl-Ludwig from Climate Alliance Italy, and I would like to talk to you about the relevance of international agreements like the Kyoto Protocol or the Paris Accord for local climate policies. What is the relevance of the international process for the climate policies in cities, in towns, in provinces, in regions, what in literature is being called the subnational actors. Climate Alliance Italy is part of a European network of cities. In all of Europe, it's 1,700, nearly 1,800 members in the 26 countries of the European Union and beyond. And a fifth of all inhabitants of the European Union live in climate alliance cities. As you see, there is still England as part of the European Union, which it is not anymore. We are a network where the members make certain commitments. We started out in 1990 and said by 2010 our members will have to cut into half their CO2 emissions. And at the time we thought by 2010 maybe the problem of climate change will be solved. As we know today, that has not happened. And so in 2000, we decided on a new quantitative goal, which is to reduce by 10% the reductions every 5 years and to cut them into half by 2030. This in 2000 was a very ambitious goal, and we are the only network of cities that has clear, defined quantitative goals. We now know that these goals are not anymore sufficiently ambitious, that the European Union is aiming at a 50% reduction by 2030, so we will have to revise our goals. But please keep in mind that originally we defined them in 2000 when before even the European Union had its climate and energy package. The other commitment is the cooperation with the people of the Amazon region, the indigenous peoples. We collaborate with COICA, which is the coordination of the 9 countries that border on the Amazon region. This is not my subject today, just to mention that from the very beginning we considered the collaboration with the south of the world is an important and irrenounceable part of a valid local climate policy. So it's local policies, but it's not that we just concentrate on our own little world. Okay, let's talk about the international process. There's a discussion which still goes on. As you know, the Paris Agreement was reached in 2015, and a little later Sergio will elaborate more on that. The Paris Agreement was reached in 2015 as part of the Conference of Parties, which is the annual conference of the United Nations on the climate, which was decided to be held every year, 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. And this year, for example, will be in Glasgow. Last year it was in Madrid. In 2015 it was in Paris, and the accord was reached to just look at it, to keep the climate global warming between 1.5 and 2 degrees. At 2 degrees, or that is still lower. This guardrail of the 1.5 to 2 degrees goes back to 2009, another conference of parties in Copenhagen, which usually is considered a failure. I don't see it that way, because already then there was decided, in a binding form for the members to deeply cut the global emissions so as to hold the increase in global temperature below 2 degrees Celsius. So it took another 6 years to then reach global accord on that. And the point is not could have been reached more, and is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? The glass is leaking, the glass is broken. That's not the point. In that moment, 2015, and that is true until today, the United Nations delivered the best accord which was in that moment conceivable. And it is an error, it is a false perception of what the international process can do if one says, well, it should be more binding, it should be more this or that. It is true the Paris Accord foresees that to reach the goal of limiting global warming under 2 degrees, each country declares by itself how much it is willing to reduce the nationally defined declarations on how much each country will reduce. So it's not being imposed on them, but on the national level, you cannot impose anyway. So there are no sanctions. There were no sanctions for the Kyoto Protocol. There are no sanctions for the Paris Accord. There is no system in place that internationally you can force nations to adhere. The only instrument you have, which is an important instrument, is to blame and shame. So what does the international accord do? It sets the framework for other actors, in premise the national governments, but then also for other players, because let me go first to because there are a number of players in the field, and on the one hand you have the objective goals which you have to reach in order to stay under the 2 degrees, and that's a scientific fact. I mean, there the climate science is sufficiently developed that we know pretty exactly how the emissions have to go down in order to reach, in order to limit global warming to a certain extent. And I'm not going to go into this graphic now in any detailed way. It serves for me to make you understand that there is a gap, and the United Nations Environmental Agency every year publishes a report. This is the from the executive summary of the report from last year, 2019, where it shows how emissions are going, how they would be going if nothing is being done, business as usual, and what needs to happen to get to a level of emissions that will have as a consequence global warming that stays under 2 degrees. And you can see that this gap is consistent Here are different scenarios, and let's say in the worst scenario we have 32 gigatons of CO2 emissions equivalent. In the best scenario we are talking about 12 gigatons. Now, what this way of looking is scientific, it is important, it gives an idea. The Paris Accord and the emissions gap report of the United Nations tell you what needs to be done. The mistake that is usually made when we talk about other actors, apart from national governments that take the commitments at the international conference, is that they are being seen as, how should I say, as dependent variables, as just to as instruments for closing the gap. And that is a way of looking at local climate policies that is detrimental, that is destructive, that does not produce any results. Instead, how should we look at local and regional climate policies? And let me remind you, it is there that people live, that where people work, where they drive their cars, where the children go to school, where they work, and where they pass their free time. So the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions has to come about, obviously, in industry, and has to come about in the daily lives of citizens, and that happens in the cities. But again, you cannot instrumentalize this and simply say you have to do this or that in order to reduce CO2 emissions. That is not going to work. I mean, people do not live for the reduction of CO2 emissions. There we find most helpful, and I think this is also in the spirit of the seminar, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. As you may remember or know, they were passed by the United Nations in 2015. They are valid until 2030. And there, the goal number 13 is climate action, and it is embedded in a wider context of activities for a development that has a future, for a development where the chances of future generations for life and community, as is the most common definition of sustainability, is guaranteed. So yes, reduce CO2 emissions, but do it in the context of a local sustainable development that also has to do with inequality, that has to do with education, that has to do with clean water, that has to do with decent work, sustainable community, etc. So here, the Sustainable Development Goals are a most important framework, also because they have been voted by 150, 160 countries. They are a common global framework. Yeah? So we have the Paris Agreement, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, we have the objective task of closing a gap, and this all has to be taken into consideration. But what I'm proposing is to take CO2 and the reduction of CO2 as a guiding variable for local development. That means you act locally, and the action that you are planning for all kinds of reasons. People do not act so much in order to save the climate, but if, for example, to reduce car traffic, to cut it into half in the next decade, in the next 15 years, means to walk more by foot, to go by bicycle. If you ask people, why do you go by bicycle? They will tell you it is quicker on short and medium distances. It costs less. It's good for my health. And I doubted that anybody will say, or let's say most research that has been done on the subject, we ask people, why do you ride a bike? And they say, because it's healthy, because it costs less, because I get there quicker. And you say the climate, oh yeah, of course, also the climate. So CO2 reduction is a guiding variable, but it's not the primary driver for local policies. Okay. Let's look at the field. We said the nation states, we said the United Nations is one actor, the international process is one process. There are many actors. There are like regional and national governments. Here on the left, you see the ex-governor of California, Jerry Brown, together with his colleague Kretschmann from Baden-Württemberg in Germany. They made a memorandum of understanding between California and the German land of Baden-Württemberg on climate policies, and they have attracted another 40 regions, towns, and all over the world. And California, both regions are very strong actors in climate policies. On the right side, that's Greenpeace and action during the Paris Conference of Parties. This is the Arc de Triomphe, and they made a very spectacular action in favor of more stringent goals during that event. So you have actors and drivers from the top down, that is the World Bank and the United Nations and the European Union and the big cities. The Pope with his encyclica Laudato Si, and there are actors from the bottom up. There are social movements like Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion. There are local governments, which are the actors we will be looking at and are looking at in this my contribution. There is civil society, very important. Many cities adhere to Climate Alliance because there are groups of students, of local environmental groups that tell the city governments, listen, you should do more for the climate, and why don't you adhere to Climate Alliance or to another of these networks. There are grassroots innovators, there are entrepreneurs. So all of these actors, or in all of these fields, there are actors that carry ahead the process of climate policies. And so there's the international level, there's the national one, there is what they call subnational, which are the local and regional level. And it does not make sense to neither to consider one of those levels to be just a dependent variable of another level. So the nation states execute what is being decided on the national level, the local level executes what's being decided on the national, and the citizens do what their city government tells them to do. This way it doesn't work in that hierarchical way of looking at it. Each of these actors has its own agenda, and we are convinced, and I think I can show that for local realities, that reducing the greenhouse gases on a local level is good for the climate, but above all, it's also good for sustainable territorial development. So what we are talking about at the local level is an integrated sustainable development, which will produce reductions of CO2 emissions. I repeated, CO2 reduction is a guiding variable, but for contents, for policies that have to do with mobility, as you can see in this, that have to do with energy, that have to do with the quality of life, that have to do with the health of the citizens. Let's look for a moment concretely what I'm talking about. This is an example from my city, Città di Castello. I'm talking from Città di Castello in central Italy. Città di Castello adhered to, it coordinates Climate Alliance in Italy, but it adhered to an important initiative of the European Union, which is the Covenant of Mayors, and elaborated a sustainable energy action plan, that shows in all different fields of how to reduce, at the time this was valid until 2020, how to reduce emissions so as to cut them by 20%, at least by 20% by 2020, as compared to 2009. And 2008 was the base year for this research, for this plan. We have done a monitoring of the plan, and the city succeeded in reaching this goal and has adhered now, the 31st of January, recently, to the new Covenant of Mayors for 2030, which also will, part of it will be a plan for the adaptation to climate change. We have been monitoring the emissions, and I apologize, this is in English. There you can see the different action fields, the economy, the family transport, public buildings, and the vehicle park of the public entity. We have been monitoring the emissions for the last 10 years to see the progress the city is making in different departments. What is happening? The different fields of action. I think I have to close, so I just show you in conclusion what are the concrete fields of action on a local level. This, for example, are photovoltaic panels that are mounted on a school by parents who grouped together, and they do that as an investment. They get interest on their investment. So they do that for the climate, they do that for their own children, but they do it also to invest their own savings. And this is what I mean. What goes together is private interest and the public good. The energy efficiency in the existing buildings is very important because heat is about 40% responsible for all emissions. In Turkey, that will be true as well, but perhaps there also is more important the conditioning, air conditioning in the summer. In both cases, a good insulated building, energy efficient building will consume less energy. That saves money and is good for the climate. Co-generation, using the heat and using the electricity, and thus raising the energy efficiency as an important technology of transition. Mobility, another 40% of emissions, very, very important. And the most difficult field, to reduce motorized car transport in favor of bicycle, of walking, of public transport, of car sharing. Here, the city of Castello did Piano di Mobilità Sostenibile, PUMS, Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, SUM. There are several thousand cities in Europe that made such a mobility plan with the goal of reducing motorized individual traffic as in favor of bicycle, going by foot, public transport, train, bus. Sustainable urban development, I will not go into that. It is a whole fascinating subject. This is an old industrial quarter on the left that has been transformed into an ecological city quarter. The overall planning by the city, the definition of certain energy standards for those new buildings does a lot to keep energy consumption down with a high quality of life in the quarter. The urban green, which mitigates because it absorbs CO2, it helps to adapt because it reduces heat islands, and it is agreeable for the citizens for their free time, for their leisure time with their children by themselves. So to close, says Matthew Nisbet, to communicate to people about actions that are local and regional, like increasing what we already said, the accessibility to public transport, making communities safer and easier to walk in, making fruits and vegetables more affordable. These are the kind of things people will want to invest in, not because they offer long-term climate change benefit, but because they improve the community and quality of life in general. I wouldn't contrapose that the one or the other. What I'm saying is that local climate policy goes together with an integrated sustainable development, and that the international agreement, like the Paris Accord, gives the framework for seeing if we are on the right track. So the local governments in climate protections are one of the actors, and locally it has to do with the role of climate protections in sustainable development. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Hi everybody, good morning. I'm Giorgia Burtachechi. I'm journalist and Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Journalisti nell'Erba. That is an online magazine dedicated to environment and sustainable development. Let me just, okay. The name Journalisti nell'Erba is sounds like journalists in the grass. The name is a pun. Because being in the grass in Italian means to be young, but Giornalisti nell'Erba is also on the grass. And this is why we talk about environment and sustainable development. Giornalisti nell'Erba provides information for young people and through young people. In fact, our primary target are young students, but often also our journalists are youngsters. This gives us a double plus. First of all, we educate young people to sustainable development by the reporter toolbox. They can work in the reporter shoes, and students in this way must to search authoritative sources of information, but then they have to understand and metabolize contents, and finally they have to reproduce them in a form that uses languages and communication tools of young people. So in this way, they became the translators of difficult and technical concepts such as environmental information has. And at the same time, they spread information acquired in their communities, in schools, family, and friends, reaching a secondary target. Here you can see in the picture a young Giornalisti nell'Erba with the Italian Ministry of Environment. Sorry, okay. Sorry, I touched something I didn't have to. Okay, this is introduction doesn't want to be an advertisement for my magazine, but it was just to talk to you what are we doing, because this is our way to join the climate action. I want to show you this video from NASA. Okay, why is important talk about environment, what is going on with our climate, and what overall what we can do. It's important to raise awareness about climate actions and global warming and what we can do. So climate actions. Today we need never as now do. We need to raise public awareness, because the civil society is the only weapon we have to defeat global warming. These are an animation from NASA, and it shows the global warming in how it will be our climate until 2050. in 60 years. So it's okay speaking about recycling or shutting off water while we are brushing our teeth. It is important, but at the same time we have to defeat the fossil fuel, and only civil society can change the market needs. We need to lower the CO2 equivalent emissions, and thinking about a new world with renewable and clean energies. But time is unfortunately is over, and we have to change now. This is the imagine from COP25 in the last December in Madrid. The oil lobbies are fighting for their survival because they are dying, because we are reaching a new world without fossil fuel, but they want to gain a year, a month, an hour, a second more, but we cannot afford it to them, and overall we cannot afford it to us. Okay, here a short video, it's just 3 minutes.
Human activities, from pollution to overpopulation, are driving up the Earth's temperature and fundamentally changing the world around us. The main cause is a phenomenon known as the greenhouse effect. Gases in the atmosphere, such as water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and chlorofluorocarbons, let the sun's light in, but keep some of the heat from escaping, like the glass walls of a greenhouse. The more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the more heat gets trapped, strengthening the greenhouse effect and increasing the Earth's temperature. Human activities, like the burning of fossil fuels, have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere by more than 1/3 since the Industrial Revolution. The rapid increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has warmed the planet at an alarming rate. While Earth's climate has fluctuated in the past, atmospheric carbon dioxide hasn't reached today's levels in hundreds of thousands of years. Climate change has consequences for our oceans, our weather, our food sources, and our health. Ice sheets, such as Greenland and Antarctica, are melting. The extra water that was once held in glaciers causes sea levels to rise and spills out of the oceans, flooding coastal regions. Warmer temperatures also make weather more extreme. This means not only more intense major storms, floods, and heavy snowfall, but also longer and more frequent droughts. These changes in weather pose challenges. Growing crops becomes more difficult. The areas where plants and animals can live shift, and water supplies are diminished. In addition to creating new agricultural challenges, climate change can directly affect people's physical health. In urban areas, the warmer atmosphere creates an environment that traps and increases the amount of smog. This is because smog contains ozone particles, which increase rapidly at higher temperatures. Exposure to higher levels of smog can cause health problems such as asthma, heart disease, and lung cancer. While the rapid rate of climate change is caused by humans, humans are also the ones who can combat it. If we work to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy sources like solar and wind, which don't produce greenhouse gas emissions, we might still be able to prevent some of the worst effects of climate change.
Okay, so we have the solution, we still have the solution, but we cannot give simple answers to complex problems. To give an example, we often listen about the uses of liquefied natural gases instead of diesel for our cars, but the LNG it is the acronym for the liquefied natural gas, is a not long-term solution for the future. And still today, scientific results about CO2 productions from even GPL versus gasolite are not clear. We have to see the long-term results. And this is not that simple, because pollutants are different when we're talking about modern cars. Moreover, when considering different type of fuel, we must consider even the production chain, since GPL is obtained from oil. Similar consideration can be done today for the hybrid and electric cars. Hybrid cars use traditional energy over a certain velocity, but with a car that is heavier because of the batteries that are the presence of the batteries, and thus it consumes more than a normal car. For a full electric car, we must consider how the electricity we use to recharge our batteries is produced. So if this is not produced from renewable energy, you can understand that the problem is still there. And overall, we can consider how batteries are treated once exhausted. I'm not saying that we have not to use hybrid cars or full electric cars. No, I'm just saying that we have to consider all the entire production chain. We need to evaluate case by case on a case-by-case basis, because everything could be a solution, but overall we need to reduce and reconsider our behavior, as the speaker before me has already said, or everything could be a problem. In general, human being activities are not sustainable for our planet. Maybe our planet would thank us if we died out. So we must find solutions that are as sustainable as possible for the Earth. And but there is not a unique solution. We have to listen the science and to create a mix of solutions related to the specific case we are focusing on. As I already told you, we cannot just give simple answer to a complex problem like the sustainable development. We cannot just be, for example, supporters of when we read bio on a food, because this not could be that it is sustainable. Just to give an example, we can always we can talk about soy and food made by soybean. They are considered green food for most of people, but in the last 50 years, the production of soybean products have risen 15 times, has increased 15 times over, with deforestation and displacement of indigenous from all over the world. Just a second. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Sorry, I just 1 second. Most of time in the large production made by environmentally conscious companies are most sustainable, because they can study their productions and reduce the impact on large productions. We have to analyze case by case basis, as I already told you. This means that moreover, the conditions on our planet are constantly changing. So what was previously a solution may no longer be valid. So how can we deal with it? This is difficult, yes, okay, but we have to listen to scientists that are always monitoring global warming and finding new solutions. I want just to show you another imaging from NASA. This is the Arctic Sea in 1984. I was a child, and this is the Arctic Sea as coverage in 2012, just few years later. So we can see how our world is constantly changing. So we have to fight fake news overall, deniers and lobbyists. We can do that by raise awareness on global warming and on science answers, a new solution overall, and spread right information. Now I want to show you the video of a girl that for sure you know, and listen what she said about what you can do, you as civil society.
This is not a drill. My name is Greta Thunberg. We are living in the beginning of a mass extinction. Our climate is breaking down. Children like me are giving up their education to protest. But we can still fix this. You can still fix this. To survive, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. But this alone will not be enough. Lots of solutions are talked about, but what about a solution that is right in front of us? I'll let my friend George explain.
There is a magic machine that sucks carbon out of the air, costs very little, and builds itself. It's called a tree. A tree is an example of a natural climate solution. Mangroves, peat bogs, jungles, marshes, seabeds, kelp forests, swamps, coral reefs, they take carbon out of the air and lock it away. Nature is a tool we can use to repair our broken climate. These natural climate solutions could make a massive difference.
Pretty cool, right?
But only if we also leave fossil fuels in the ground.
Here's the crazy part. Right now, we are ignoring them. We spend 1,000 times more on global fossil fuel subsidies than on natural-based solutions.
Natural climate solutions get just 2% of all the money used on tackling climate breakdown.
This is your money. It is your taxes and your savings.
Even more crazy, right now where we need nature the most, we're destroying it faster than ever.
Up to 200 species are going extinct every single day.
Much of the Arctic ice is gone. Most of our wild animals have gone. Much of our soil has gone.
So what should we do?
What should you do?
It's simple. We need to protect, restore, and fund. Protect. Tropical forests are being cut down at the rate of 30 football pitches a minute.
Where nature is doing something vital, we must protect it.
Restore. Much of our planet has been damaged.
But nature can regenerate, and we can help ecosystems bounce back.
Fund.
We need to stop funding things that destroy nature and pay for things that help it.
It is that simple. Protect, restore, fund.
This can happen everywhere. Many people have already begun using natural climate solutions. We need to do it on a massive scale.
You can be part of this.
Vote for people who defend nature.
Share this video. Talk about this.
All around the world, there are amazing movements fighting for nature. Join them.
Everything counts. What you do counts.
So, as you have listened, people has the power as sang Patti Smith, but maybe you are too young to remember that. The power to choose for something produced by renewable energy and not by fossil fuel, but even the power to vote for a political that really cares, a political decision maker that really cares about our planet, about our existence. This is an imagine from a climate strike. Unfortunately, the picture is cut, but the sentence is: the power of the people is stronger than the people in power. And this scares politics. Don't forget about it. Don't forget about what a single 16 years old girl with bride has did just striking every Friday in front of the Sweden parliament. Now she's not alone anymore. Thousands and thousands are young people that have joined the Friday for Future movement. They are angry, and they are right, because it's their and it's yours the future that is in danger. Politics are scared about these movements, and this is the reason why they are trying to put their action down to lower the public opinion on what they are saying. Greta Thunberg is just a symbol. She is the one who decided to carry on her shoulders the weight to be the symbol of the fight for the climate change. But are many more the activists from Fridays for Future. I'm thinking about Lisa Neubauer, the German Fridays for Future leader, or Arshak Makichan. He is a Russian activist that I have the pleasure to meet in Madrid at COP25. Arshak has an incredible story. He is 25 years old, and he got arrested by the Russian police just because he has organized a school strike in the center of Moscow. In fact, in Russia, you can strike, but just in isolated places like booths and where people cannot see you. So Arshak tried to get the permission for striking in the center of Moscow, but when he got the 10th refuse by the administration, the local administration, he decided to strike anyway. When he got back to Russia from Madrid, from COP25, he has been arrested, and he spent 1 week in a prison just because he strike to raise common people awareness about the climate crisis. And I want to show you his video, the interview that we have in COP25. Unfortunately, we have just subtitles in Italian, but he's speaking in English, so you can just you can hear what his story.
I said Russian Moscow government allowing to strike together only in the one place. And if you want to strike where people can see your strike, they are refusing you, and it's illegal that they are refusing you. And at the 10th time when they refused us illegally, I decided to strike anyway with other people, and some people joined me, and we were detained. Yeah. And I was waiting for a trial a long time, and they were afraid to like call me the threat for the trial because I have like a lot of international support. But they called me like a month later after the strike. The strike was on October 25, and they called me a week before my train to Minsk and Berlin, Paris, Madrid. And I couldn't attend the first trial. It was on November 28th. And yeah, I was represented there by the lawyer, but they decided to postpone the trial because they couldn't arrest me without my attendance on the trial. So when I will be in Moscow on December 20, the same day will be a trial, and most likely they will arrest me for a few days for organizing unauthorized protest, even though I sent an application and they illegally refused. The most important thing that they have to tell the truth to the people, because they lie about climate or they silent about climate and they not telling the truth to the people. So people don't know that we can change something to fight climate crisis. People saying that, seeing that something happening because there were huge forest fire in Siberia, there were floodings in Irkutsk region, people seeing it, but they don't know what we can do. And we are like Fridays for Future trying to raise awareness about climate crisis and trying to tell what we can do, like in Russia, to fight and climate crisis, to reduce our emissions. So we demanded a lot of things, but the most important is they have to tell the truth to the people, and then people will decide what to do.
So we need to raise awareness about climate crisis because it's important, because people don't know what they can do. Arshak has been arrested just because he wanted to raise awareness about climate crisis. What does it mean? It means that governments are scared about what civil society can do. This is my opinion for sure. But we can see that there are many interests that are stopping the transition towards world carbon neutral. And this was the crucial point in the last COP25. As you may already know, it was supposed to be the COP of ambition, but it wasn't actually. And the discussion on Article 6 of Paris Agreement, which deals with economic and trade issues, has not met the consensus of all the countries. And we have to solve it during this year, before December, before Glasgow's COP, when the Paris Agreement will be implemented. Perhaps it's better not to have found an agreement in the last December, because there would be no ambition. The condition of the negotiation were very not good. But now I want to show you a video recorded by Lara. Lara is a journalist in nell'Erba. She's 16. She's also a Fridays for Future activist, and she has been the youngest Italian journalist, but maybe not so Italian, at COP25. And I want to show you the video she recorded during the protest rally in COP25, organized by the civil society and Fridays for Future.
People living in the Arctic and in the North are the least responsible for climate change. Yet they pay the biggest impacts, and they face the biggest impacts and challenges. Because they live in the North, they see the melting ice caps every single day.
It was a question of survival and death. And I want to say that I am a victim of this whole climate crisis, and I'm not ashamed to say so.
What's going on this COP? I think there's been a lot of talking, a lot of high-level technical discussions, which I was trying to follow last week, and I got quite lost in the loss and damage stuff. I feel like there's a lot of talking and there's not a lot of heart, there's not a lot of humanity here.
For the next 10 years, we will be underwater if we don't do something. And that is what's so wrong with climate justice and climate change in my country. And that is why we need to do something as Canadians.
So the next 10 years will be crucial for our world. During this COP25, civil society and Fridays for Future made their voices loud. Journalisti nell'Erba is attending COP since 2015, the Paris Agreement one. And we saw the civil society participation get bigger and bigger. During COP25, there have been many protest rallies, and many people have undergone debadging. So the police removed their badges for the access to COP25, and they were expelled. So this is, in my opinion, this is why the civil society frightens just with peaceful demonstration. Now let's take a look what is happening in Europe. Climate change is a reality, and we can see its effect every day. But the next 10 years, as the activist in the video has said, we will see an exponential deterioration of our planet. So here's a video. Actually, this video is from about 3 years ago, but I liked it because it was really short and with animation, very simple animation. So I want to show you. It's really short. I want to show you it, and then I want to talk to you about what you can do, about your opportunity, because climate change could be even an opportunity for you.
Climate change is already a reality, affecting ecosystems, the economy, and our well-being and quality of life. Globally, temperatures are rising, and extreme weather events such as heat waves, flooding, and droughts are happening more often and becoming more severe. Climate records are being broken year after year. Climate change is impacting nature. Local plants and animals struggle adapting to changes in weather patterns. Non-local species are spreading to new areas, some bringing new diseases affecting crops, animals, and humans. Different regions will be impacted in different ways. Climate change is also impacting the global economy. Changes to food production, trade, and access to key resources like water and fertile land can increase geopolitical risks also for Europe. No matter where we live in the world, we are all vulnerable to the effects of climate change. The impacts of climate change will depend on how effective our efforts are today and in the future. We need to drastically reduce the amount of greenhouse gases we release and, at the same time, prepare for a changing climate. Sharing knowledge is essential for climate change efforts. A greater understanding of how each region will be affected and what can be done to prepare for adverse effects can help us better face the challenges to come. In facing the impacts of climate change, inaction is simply not an option. We must develop a climate-resilient society through a combination of low-carbon technologies, resilient infrastructure, improved disaster preparedness, and other adaptation solutions. For example, using parks, ponds, and rivers in cities to absorb excess rainwater and to cool cities, all of which also helps improve our quality of life. Our environment and ultimately our well-being depend on what we do now.
Depend on what we are doing now. As I already told you, this video is from about 3 years ago, and the situation has rapidly worsened. Our life depends on what we are doing now. We must defeat the fossil fuel and reach early the net zero emission. The Europe aims to be climate neutral by 2050, an economy with net zero greenhouse gases emissions. We have 30 years left, but the next 10 years will be crucial. So it's your turn. I don't want to scare with this short overview, but I think that climate change could be an opportunity for you, because you are the future, and you can just imagine all the new jobs that will birth in a world based on a new economy. So you are students, you can just imagine which kind of jobs we will need for natural-based solution, as the video show you, which kind of researchers we need to find new technologies for carbon neutral emissions, and even which kind of economists we need for the world that will come. Think about it, and I think that you can find your opportunity, but overall you can really you are our future, and you are our salvation. So I hope I have not bored you, but overall I hope I've inspired you. So just raise awareness, listen to science, and join the climate action. And thank you.
Gases, the production plus 20% of energy from renewable energy sources, and plus 20% of energy efficiency. Kyoto Club does information, training, and we advocate and make policy proposals at the national, European, and global level, because we have observatory status with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, to bring ahead the solutions identified already at the time of the Kyoto Protocol, and which have become more and more clear. One point I would like to make is that there are no alibis. We know the causes, the effects, the solutions. So nobody will be able to say in the coming decades, I didn't know. We know very well what are the reasons for the climate crisis which we are living, and what needs to be done. So we need to do it. Starting with the Kyoto Protocol, you find everything online. Kyoto Protocol is the first international agreement on the effects of climate change. It has committed the parties to binding emission reduction targets. We are talking about 1997, and we are talking about like a world, a totally different world. If you notice from the slide, the Kyoto Protocol was adopted in the Japanese city of Kyoto in December 1997, entered into force only in 2005 because of the mechanisms foreseen by the protocol. At the time, only industrialized, what were then considered industrialized regions of the world, so North America, Europe, Russia, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, had reduction targets. And this is the biggest difference with the Paris Agreement 2015, which has targets for all countries in the world. The emission targets agreed in Kyoto were based on the data provided by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the scientific body providing data and monitoring the evolution on climate all over the world. IPCC involves now more than 3,000 universities and research institutions at global level, and the knowledge that it has produced is commonly accepted as the reference on the climate change effects and discussion. So very important what IPCC writes, and on the website most of the data and research pieces of research are available. The situation is very serious. You have in this slide the global risks report summary of this year, beginning of this year. The source is the World Economic Forum, which are basically the bad guys, in quotation marks. World Economic Forum brings together all the major finance and multinational company stakeholders, those that in the past have heavily been involved with fossil fuels, which are the first source of greenhouse gases. And even them, as you can see, now recognize that the top risks for the next years at global level all have to do with climate change, environmental loss, threats, better said, environmental threats, including biodiversity loss, the water crisis, the natural disasters, and human-made environmental disasters. So there is, in fact, in the international discourse, unanimity on the fact that climate change is the major threat and problem our world is facing. The Kyoto Protocol, thanks to what has been agreed in Doha in December 2012, the so-called Doha Amendment, is still in force until 31st December of this year. So Kyoto Protocol is still in force until the end of this year for those regions. So 37, as you can read in the slide, industrialized countries, plus the European community, the European Union, have successfully decreased their reductions. What's the problem then? The problem is that in the meantime, the level of knowledge has expanded, and it has shown that the targets agreed in Kyoto are insufficient compared to the global warming and the various side effects caused by climate change, and that much more ambition is needed. By the way, in the meantime, the whole discussion on green economy, bio-circular economy, renewables and energy efficiency has shown that by going in the direction of giving up fossil fuels, the quality of life of the citizens, of the countries, of the peoples involved can be greatly improved, and that it's a sort of win-win situation. You fight climate change through the creation of new jobs, innovation, research, and everybody has to gain from it. So while the Kyoto Protocol is still in force, the warnings from the scientific world keeps coming up. Here you have the forecasts by the IPCC at the end of the century. If action is not taken earlier, which means +6 degrees in increase in the global mean temperatures, this would have devastating effects, and is really a scenario which the world cannot bear. So we need to act. You see, the latest years have always been the warmest ever, and we already have reached in 2016 plus 1.25, but all these years have always been very warm, too warm. Now, the Paris Agreement in this respect is a big sign of hope. In 2015, all the governments of the world agreed to keep the increases of global mean temperatures by at the maximum plus 1.5 centigrades by the end of the century. Now, I prepared this presentation on last February 15. At the time, 5 days ago, it was 187 countries of the 197, which are part of the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, that had ratified, that had said not only signed but also ratified the Paris Agreement. Today, the new figure is 189 that you can find on the link of the ratification process. So 189 countries out of 197 have ratified to the convention, and the Paris Agreement has entered already into force in 2016. The problem with the Paris Agreement is twofold. One is that based on the Paris pledges, each country, and you find all the documents online, in Paris said we are going to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions and transform energy systems, and we're going to do this and this and this. You find all the pledges online, and putting all the pledges together, we see from this graph that by the end of the century it would not be plus 1.5 degrees, but it would be plus 2.7. So there is a gap between the political statement, we want global mean temperatures not to go beyond 1.5 degrees, and we have seen in the previous slide that we are already there now, 2020. So that's the first problem, the gap between the political will and the actual pledges by countries. The second green issue is the knowledge that in the meantime, here you have the various greenhouse gases and their sources. So we know very well where to intervene. The knowledge has brought to always IPCC to the global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius special report published in October 2018. And basically the special report says that the risks involved, even in what has been agreed in Paris, 1.5 degrees warmer for the global mean temperatures, still involves very heavy risks for in terms of sea levels rising, melting of the glaciers. So the global warming special report has called on everybody, saying we have 12 to 14 years to intervene and to avoid what IPCC describes as incompatible +4 degrees scenario, which is incompatible with organized global community. So with the +2 degree scenario being described as very dangerous, and so once again the scientific world tells us more ambition is needed and more needs to be done to avoid, and I quote, irreversible effects and catastrophic weather extreme events. So very clear what we must do, and you find it in this slide, to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees increase. And this is a roadmap for all countries, in fact. So no coal power plants, change oil and gas into renewables and energy efficiency, renovate buildings, best practices in agriculture, zero deforestation. So they're all initiatives that we call for, and of course the awareness is increasing. We need to ask decision makers to go faster in implementing these decisions. European Union is doing a lot. You may have heard of the new initiative by the European Commission called the Green Deal. So quite an ambitious program impacting on all economic sectors, with higher targets for greenhouse gas reductions and more renewables, energy efficiency, and interconnection. We need to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, which the United Nations have approved. So all countries have approved with facts. And of course, we need to demonstrate. We support strongly the movement of the students around the world, which who have been and will continue also for this year to make their voices heard. The Fridays for Future. Here you have the website where you can see where the closest Fridays for Future groups are active, also or where you live. We need to divest. You see here that since 2011, over 14 trillions of US dollars have been moved from fossil fuels to renewables and energy efficiency. The kinds of institutions which are moving such huge amounts of money are indicated there, and we welcome the decision by the World Bank, which has announced that since last year, no longer it will finance oil and gas, and the decision, more recent decision by the European Investment Bank, the biggest European investment institution, which has decided that as of next year, no more money will be lent or invested in oil and gas. Thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions, I'm here at your disposal.